Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the stars disappear behind massive alien ships. The blue-skinned Zephyrian Empire had come to Earth with enough warships to block out the sun. Their vessels stretched across space like a metal wall, each one bigger than anything humans had ever built. The sight made Jake's stomach tight with fear, but he kept his face calm for his crew. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice crackled through the communication system from Earth Defense Command. Her words were steady, but Jake could hear the worry underneath. The Zephyrians had given Earth 6 hours to surrender completely, or they would destroy every living thing on the planet. They had done this to 17 other worlds already. Each time, entire civilizations had vanished in fire and smoke. Jake looked at the tactical display showing Earth's defenses. 3 orbital stations burned in space, their metal twisted and broken. The defense fleet that had taken 50 years to build was now just floating wreckage. Only the Defiance and 12 other ships remained to protect humanity's homeworld. Against the alien fleet, it was like bringing rocks to fight cannons. The Zephyrian ultimatum played again on all frequencies. Their translator machines turned the alien words into cold human speech. The message showed holographic images of conquered worlds where crystal cities lay in ruins and alien people worked as slaves in deep mines. The Zephyrians did not just kill their enemies. They broke them completely and made them serve forever, Lieutenant. Amy Johnson worked at her station nearby, her fingers flying over the controls as she tried to find any weakness in the enemy formation. She was the best systems specialist in the fleet, able to hack into almost any computer system. Her red hair fell across her face as she concentrated, but Jake could see the frustration in her movements. The Zephyrian ships used technology that was centuries ahead of human science. Sergeant Chris Miller checked his weapons one more time. Even though everyone knew that personal firearms would be useless against alien armor, the big soldier had fought in the colony wars and survived battles that had killed thousands of other Marines. His calm presence helped keep the younger crew members from panicking, but Jake could see the tension in his shoulders. Dr. Helen Brooks studied the alien ships through the long-range sensors, taking notes about their design and energy signatures. The xenobiologist had spent years studying pieces of Zephyrian technology that human forces had captured in earlier battles. She understood the aliens better than anyone else on Earth, but even her knowledge seemed small compared to the massive fleet surrounding them. Down on Earth's surface, civilian evacuation ships lifted off from major cities, carrying millions of people toward the outer system where they might survive if the planet fell. Parents held their children close as they boarded the vessels, not knowing if they would ever see their home again. The lucky ones had seats on ships. Most people could only wait and hope that their leaders would find a way to save them. In the Defense Council chambers beneath Geneva, Earth's military commanders argued about surrender terms. Some wanted to give up immediately and hoped the Zephyrians would be merciful. Others insisted on fighting to the last ship, even if it meant humanity's complete destruction. The debate went in circles while precious time slipped away. Jake turned away from the arguing voices on the communication channel and focused on the enemy fleet. His tactical training helped him see patterns that others missed. The Zephyrian ships moved in perfect formation, each one responding instantly to commands from a central source. Their coordination was flawless, but Jake realized that this perfection might also be their weakness. He called his senior staff to the bridge's strategy room and spread out the tactical displays. The enemy fleet had one massive command ship at its center, surrounded by protective rings of smaller vessels. Every movement, every weapon-firing pattern, every communication burst originated from that central vessel. If something happened to the command ship, the entire fleet might lose its coordination. Amy looked at the data and shook her head. The command ship was protected by energy shields that could stop nuclear weapons and armor thick enough to survive direct hits from Earth's most powerful guns. Getting close enough to damage it would require flying through the fire of 1,000 enemy vessels. Any ship that tried would be destroyed long before it could fire a single shot. Chris studied the tactical situation. and suggested using the debris field from Earth's destroyed defense platforms as cover. The wreckage was thick enough to hide a small ship, at least for a while. A strike team might be able to reach the enemy command vessel, if they were lucky and very careful. Helen pointed out that they would need to understand Zephyrium technology well enough to actually damage the command ship once they reached it. Her studies had revealed some potential weak points in their power systems, but she would need to be there in person to guide any sabotage attempt. Jake looked at his 3 officers and made a decision that would change everything. They would take a small stealth ship through the debris field and try to reach the enemy command vessel. It was almost certainly a suicide mission, but it was the only chance humanity had left. While Earth's leaders continued their useless arguments, Jake and his team would act. The evacuation ships continued to flee Earth's surface as Jake prepared for what everyone believed would be his final mission. Behind them, the massive Zephyrian fleet moved closer to the blue planet that had been humanity's home for millions of years. The Shadow Runner slipped through the debris field like a ghost, its experimental cloaking system bending light around the small stealth ship. Jake piloted the vessel carefully between twisted pieces of metal that had once been Earth's orbital defense platforms. Each chunk of wreckage told a story of brave soldiers who had died trying to protect their homeworld. But Jake could not afford to think about that now. Amy worked at her station, monitoring the alien sensors that swept through the debris field like searchlights. The Zephyrian technology was incredibly advanced, but their scans followed predictable patterns. Every few minutes she guided Jake toward gaps in their sensor coverage, keeping the Shadow Runner hidden from the massive alien fleet. The stolen Zephyrian supply ship appeared through the wreckage ahead of them, its hull marked with alien symbols that Helen had learned to read during her years of study. The vessel was smaller than the main warships, but still 3 times larger than anything in Earth's fleet. Its cargo holds contained replacement parts and ammunition for the attacking force, making it a perfect target for infiltration. Jake Brock, the Shadow Runner, alongside the supply ship's docking bay, using magnetic clamps to attach their vessel to the alien hull. The connection was rough and noisy, but the sound was lost in the constant vibration from the supply ship's massive engines. Chris checked his weapons one final time, then activated the cutting torch that would burn through the alien airlock. The interior of the Zephyrian ship was unlike anything the humans had ever seen. Long corridors stretched in curved lines, their walls covered with symbols that glowed with soft blue light. The air tasted strange and metallic, filtered through alien life support systems that maintained an atmosphere suitable for multiple species. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth normal, making each step feel different and uncertain. They moved through the ship in single file, following Helen's guidance as she translated the directional markings on the walls. The Zephyrian crew was larger than expected, with dozens of aliens moving through the corridors on various duties. Most were the blue-skinned Zephyrians themselves, tall and thin with angular faces and large black eyes. But Jake noticed other species among them, creatures with different skin colors and body shapes, who moved with the careful steps of those who knew they were not free. The first combat came suddenly when a Zephyrian guard rounded a corner and spotted the human intruders. The alien reached for his weapon, but Chris was faster, his rifle firing 3 quick shots that dropped the guard before he could raise an alarm. The alien's weapon clattered to the floor, its energy cells still glowing with stored power. Amy reached the ship's computer center after 10 minutes of careful movement through the alien corridors. The systems were unlike anything in human technology, with crystalline components that responded to touch and thought rather than simple mechanical controls. She connected her portable computer to the alien network using translation programs that Helen had developed to navigate the foreign data structures. The information they found changed everything Jake thought he knew about the war. The Zephyrian Empire was not the united force it appeared to be. Internal communications revealed tension and dissatisfaction among the conquered species who made up nearly half of the Imperial fleet. The insectoid Kithani operated most of the technical systems, while reptilian Sorok served as heavy infantry and crystalline Morvani Maintained the energy weapons. Helen studied the personnel records and discovered evidence of subtle sabotage throughout the fleet. Equipment failures happened more often than they should, weapon systems suffered mysterious malfunctions, and supply shipments were frequently delayed or misrouted. The enslaved species were fighting back in small ways, but they lacked coordination and leadership to make their resistance truly effective. Jake realized that humanity was not facing an impossible enemy, but a collection of oppressed peoples held together by fear and superior technology. The Zephyrians themselves were actually a minority within their own empire, relying on divided and demoralized slave species to maintain their control. If someone could unite the various enslaved races and give them hope, the entire imperial structure might collapse. The data download took longer than expected, forcing the team to hide from several patrol groups that passed through the area. Each time, they pressed themselves into alcoves and storage spaces, holding their breath while alien voices spoke in languages they could not understand. The tension was almost unbearable, but Amy continued her work with steady concentration. Sergeant Miller placed explosive charges throughout the supply ship while the others gathered intelligence. The devices were small but powerful enough to cripple the vessel and send a message to other ships in the fleet. More importantly, the explosions would provide cover for their escape and make the Zephyrians think they were dealing with a simple sabotage mission rather than an intelligence-gathering operation. The team prepared to leave the supply ship, but Jake made a decision that surprised his companions. Instead of returning to the Shadow Runner and fleeing back to Earth, he announced that they would transfer to a larger vessel closer to the fleet's command center. The mission had revealed opportunities that were too important to ignore, even if it meant greater danger for all of them. Helen objected that their small team could not possibly fight their way through an entire battle fleet, but Jake pointed out that they would not be fighting alone. The enslaved species within the Zephyrian fleet were already conducting their own resistance activities. With proper coordination and inspiration, that resistance could become something much more dangerous to the Empire. Amy finished downloading the alien database and disconnected her equipment from their systems. The information they had gathered would be worthless if they could not get it to the right people, but Jake's new plan meant they would be going deeper into enemy territory rather than returning to safety. The risk was enormous, but so was the potential reward. The explosions began as they transferred to a stolen Zephyrian transport, the supply ship disappearing in a ball of fire that lit up the debris field. Alarms sounded throughout the alien fleet as the enemy realized they had been infiltrated, but Jake's team was already moving toward their next target. The hunt had begun, but now the humans knew they were not the only ones fighting for freedom. The massive command dreadnought stretched across space like a floating city, its hull covered with weapon turrets and sensor arrays that could detect a whisper from 1,000 kilometers away. Jake stared at the alien vessel through the viewport of their stolen transport, knowing that somewhere inside that ship was the brain that controlled the entire Zephyrian fleet. Getting inside would be the hardest thing any of them had ever attempted. Helen had spent the journey studying the command ship's layout using the stolen database from the supply vessel. The alien architecture followed patterns that made sense. Once she understood their logic, with critical systems protected by multiple layers of security and redundant passages, the Zephyrians built their ships like fortresses, designed to survive attacks from external enemies, but not necessarily from threats that were already inside. Amy worked on forging access credentials using the alien computer systems they had captured. The Zephyrian security protocols were complex but followed predictable patterns based on species hierarchy and duty assignments. By identifying themselves as a mixed crew of enslaved technicians, they might be able to move through the ship without attracting immediate attention from the guards. The docking procedure went smoothly, with their forged credentials passing the automated security checks. Jake felt his heart pounding as their transport settled into the docking bay, surrounded by dozens of other vessels that served the massive command ship. Alien crew members moved back and forth, loading supplies and conducting maintenance on the various craft. Paying no attention to another routine arrival, they split into two groups to cover more ground and increase their chances of success. Amy and Helen headed toward the communication center, carrying the technical equipment needed to broadcast messages throughout the fleet. Jake and Chris moved toward the command center, following corridor maps that Helen had memorized during their approach to the ship. The internal layout of the command ship was even more impressive than its external appearance. Corridors wide enough for 6 people stretched in multiple directions, their walls lined with displays showing tactical information from across the Zephyrian Empire. The ceiling rose high above their heads, giving the passages an almost cathedral-like feel that was both beautiful and intimidating. Jake and Chris encountered their first serious resistance near the ship's central core, where elite Zephyrian guards protected the most critical systems. These were not ordinary soldiers, but specially trained warriors who had served the Empire for decades. Their armor was thicker than standard equipment, and their weapons could punch through the heaviest human battlesuits without difficulty. The fight was brutal and chaotic, with energy bolts filling the air as the humans used every tactical advantage they could find. Jake discovered that the Zephyrian warriors relied on predetermined combat patterns that worked well against conventional opponents but could be confused by unexpected actions. He used the ship's own systems against them, triggering emergency doors to separate the guards and creating environmental hazards that forced them to fight on human terms. Chris proved that human adaptability was superior to alien training when he turned a maintenance robot into an improvised weapon, using its cutting tools to disable several guards before they could react. The big sergeant had learned to think creatively during his years of combat experience, finding solutions that would never occur to enemies who followed rigid tactical doctrines. Meanwhile, Amy and Helen reached the communication center and began the complex process of accessing the fleet-wide broadcast network. The alien technology was incredibly sophisticated, but Amy's expertise with computer systems allowed her to navigate the foreign interfaces with growing confidence. Helen provided translation assistance, helping to decode the command protocols that controlled information flow throughout the Empire. The message they prepared was simple but powerful, designed to inspire hope in the enslaved species while providing practical information about weapon storage areas and security weaknesses. More importantly, it carried a concept that could transcend species barriers, the idea that freedom was worth fighting for, regardless of the odds against success. Helen made contact with a group of Cathani technicians who were working in the ship's engineering section, using hand signals and basic words to communicate with the insectoid aliens. The Cathani had been planning their own uprising for months, gathering weapons and identifying key targets throughout the ship. The appearance of humans who refused to surrender gave them the inspiration they needed to finally act. The rebellion began in the engineering sections and spread quickly through the lower decks where most of the enslaved species worked. Cathani saboteurs disabled critical systems while Sorok warriors turned their weapons against Zephyrian overseers. The orderly command ship dissolved into chaos as internal battles raged in dozens of compartments simultaneously. Jake and Chris fought their way through increasingly desperate Zephyrian defenders as news of the uprising spread through the ship's communication system. The alien guards had been trained to fight external enemies, not deal with coordinated resistance from within their own vessel. Their confusion grew worse as familiar systems began failing and trusted crew members revealed themselves as enemies. The broadcast went out across the entire fleet just as Jake reached the main command center, carrying footage of the rebellion, along with detailed information about Zephyrian weaknesses. On dozens of ships, enslaved species received the transmission and realized that resistance was possible. The message showed them that others were already fighting and that the seemingly invincible empire could be challenged successfully. Fleet Admiral Vex Corahan stood on the command center's main platform, a towering figure in ceremonial armor who had conquered 17 star systems during his long career. The alien leader watched his carefully ordered fleet descend into chaos as ship after ship reported internal uprisings. He could not understand how one human's defiance had unraveled decades of imperial control. The command center's main display showed the growing scope of the rebellion, with red warning lights indicating ships that had fallen to insurgent forces. What had begun as a simple infiltration mission had become something much larger and more dangerous to the Empire. The enslaved species were no longer content to serve quietly, inspired by the example of humans who refused to accept defeat. Jake entered the command center with his weapon ready, facing the alien admiral who represented everything he despised. About tyranny and oppression? Behind him, the sounds of battle echoed through the corridors as the rebellion continued to spread. The final confrontation was about to begin, but Jake knew that regardless of the outcome, the spark of freedom had already been lit throughout the galaxy. The command center erupted in violence as Jake faced Admiral Vex Corahan in the heart of the Zephyrian fleet. The alien leader was enormous, standing nearly 3 meters tall with arms that could crush a human skull like an egg. His ceremonial armor was covered with symbols representing the 17 worlds he had conquered, each one a reminder of civilizations that no longer existed. But Jake had not come this far to be intimidated by size or reputation. The Admiral's weapon was unlike anything humans had ever seen, a crystalline blade that hummed with energy and could cut through the thickest armor. Jake dodged the first swing and rolled behind a control console as the alien weapon sliced through metal like it was paper. Sparks flew from damaged systems while emergency lights bathed the command center in red illumination that made everything look like a scene from hell. Chris fought desperately against the remaining Zephyrian guards, his rifle firing in short bursts as he tried to keep the aliens from overwhelming Jake's position. The sergeant had been wounded in the arm during their approach to the command center, but he continued fighting with the determination that had made him a legend among human soldiers. Each shot he fired bought Jake precious seconds to maneuver around the deadly alien admiral. Amy's fingers flew over the communication controls as she maintained the broadcast that was spreading rebellion throughout the fleet. The images she transmitted showed enslaved species fighting for their freedom on dozens of ships, proving that the seemingly impossible was actually happening. Her technical skills had become a weapon more powerful than any gun, turning the Empire's own communication network against them. Helen coordinated with rebel groups throughout the ship, using her knowledge of alien languages to help different species work together effectively. The Kithani were natural saboteurs who excelled at disabling critical systems, while the Sorok provided heavy combat support wherever fighting was fiercest. The crystalline Morvani could survive in damaged sections where other life forms would die, making them perfect for conducting repairs under fire. The battle between Jake and Admiral Corahan was as much about philosophy as physical combat. The alien leader represented the belief that order required hierarchy and control, that some beings were naturally meant to rule while others were born to serve. Jake fought for the opposite principle, the idea that freedom was a right that belonged to all thinking creatures regardless of their species or origin. Jake used his smaller size and greater agility to avoid the Admiral's powerful attacks, striking at weak points in the alien's armor while staying clear of that deadly crystalline blade. Human combat training emphasized adaptability and creative thinking, allowing soldiers to find solutions that would never occur to enemies who relied on overwhelming force. Every move Jake made was unpredictable, keeping the Admiral off balance and preventing him from using his superior strength effectively. The rebellion reached its peak as explosions echoed throughout the massive fleet. Chris Miller's demolition charges detonated on ship after ship, guided by rebel forces who had gained access to critical systems. The coordinated sabotage caused cascading failures that crippled entire vessels, but the cost in lives was terrible as Zephyrian forces struck back with merciless efficiency. The broadcast reached Earth just as the homeworld's defenders were preparing for their final battle. The images of humans fighting alongside alien rebels gave hope to billions of people who had resigned themselves to death or slavery. Children in evacuation shelters watched the footage with wide eyes, seeing that their species had not given up even when facing impossible odds. Amy expanded the broadcast to include tactical information that helped rebel forces coordinate their attacks more effectively. Her computer skills allowed her to hack into Zephyrian command systems and provide real-time intelligence about guard positions, weapon storage locations, and vulnerable systems. The information flow turned disorganized uprisings into coordinated military operations. Admiral Corahan finally began to understand what made humans so dangerous as Jake continued to evade his attacks and strike back with increasing effectiveness. The alien had conquered 17 worlds by following proven strategies that had worked for centuries. But humans refused to follow the established patterns. They adapted constantly, finding new solutions to old problems and inspiring others to believe that any challenge could be overcome. The fight reached its climax when Jake managed to damage the Admiral's weapon, causing the crystalline blade to crack and lose its energy field. The alien leader roared in fury and charged forward, attempting to crush his human opponent with bare hands. But Jake was ready for the attack, using the Admiral's own momentum against him in a move that sent the massive alien crashing into a bank of control systems. Admiral Corahan died slowly, his body broken by the impact with the unyielding alien technology. As his life faded, he finally grasped the truth that had eluded him throughout his long career. Humans were dangerous not because of their weapons or their ships, but because of their ability to inspire others to believe that freedom was worth any sacrifice. That inspiration could not be defeated by superior technology or overwhelming numbers. The victory came at a cost that Jake had not anticipated. As the rebellion spread throughout the Zephyrian fleet, the Empire's response was swift and brutal. Reinforcement fleets began converging on the Sol system from 3 directions, carrying planet-killing weapons that the Empire reserved for the most extreme situations. The Imperial High Command had decided that humanity represented an existential threat that required complete elimination. Helen received the intelligence reports about the approaching reinforcements and realized the terrible irony of their success. By inspiring the rebellion, they had forced the Empire to reveal its true nature as a force of absolute destruction. Earth now faced total annihilation rather than mere conquest, with weapons capable of sterilizing every planet and moon in the solar system. Jake stood over the body of Admiral Corahan and watched the tactical displays showing massive Zephyrian reinforcements entering the outer system. Their weapons were already charging for a bombardment that would leave Earth as lifeless as an asteroid. The rebellion had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams, but it might have doomed the very world they had tried to save. The command center fell silent except for the distant sounds of fighting as rebel forces continued their battle throughout the ship. Jake knew that he had perhaps hours before those approaching fleets reached Earth and began the final destruction. The spark of freedom had been lit throughout the galaxy, but it might burn out before it could truly change anything. Jake stood in the captured command center and made a decision that shocked everyone around him. Instead of fleeing with the rebel ships or preparing for a final desperate battle, he opened a communication channel to the approaching Zephyrian reinforcement fleets. His words echoed across space as he offered to surrender himself in exchange for Earth's survival, knowing that the Empire wanted to make an example of the human who had started the galaxy-wide rebellion. The offer created immediate chaos within the Zephyrian command structure. Some admirals argued for accepting the proposal and executing Jake publicly to discourage future uprisings across their territories. Others insisted that humanity had proven too dangerous to be allowed to survive in any form, regardless of whether their leader surrendered. The debate raged through encrypted channels while the massive fleets continued their approach toward Earth. Amy monitored the alien communications and discovered that Jake's desperate gambit was actually working better than anyone had expected. The Empire was divided against itself, with different factions pursuing conflicting strategies that prevented unified action. While the aliens argued among themselves, precious time passed that allowed rebel forces throughout the galaxy to consolidate their gains and prepare for coordinated resistance. Helen used the delay to establish contact with uprising leaders on distant worlds, coordinating through communication networks that the rebels had captured during their initial successes. The news she received was remarkable. The rebellion had spread far beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The Kithani homeworld had declared independence and was fighting off Imperial occupation forces. Several other species were preparing coordinated strikes against major Zephyrian installations. The scope of the galactic uprising became clear as intelligence reports flowed into the captured command ship. On the industrial world of Morvac Prime, crystalline beings had seized control of weapon manufacturing facilities and were producing arms for rebel forces. The gas giant mining stations in the Sorok system had fallen to reptilian workers who turned their heavy equipment into improvised weapons of war. Chris coordinated the defense of the command ship while Jake waited for the Empire's response to his surrender offer. The big sergeant had been promoted to general by acclamation among the various rebel species, who recognized his tactical skills and inspirational leadership. His teams worked frantically to prepare the captured vessel for the battles that were surely coming. Regardless of what the Zephyrians decided about Jake's proposal, the Empire's internal crisis deepened as reports arrived of widespread rebellions across dozens of star systems. The cost of maintaining control over insurgent populations was straining resources that had seemed unlimited just days before. Garrison forces that should have been available for deployment were tied down fighting local uprisings, leaving the Empire unable to respond effectively to multiple simultaneous threats. Jake realized that his individual act of defiance had accomplished something that no military strategy could have achieved. It had shown enslaved species throughout the galaxy that the Empire could be defeated, that freedom was possible even for those who had lived in chains for generations. The psychological impact was more devastating to Imperial control than any weapon humanity could have built. The formation of the Liberation Alliance began when Jake sent a message to rebel leaders across the galaxy, proposing a unified coalition of free species working together to overthrow Zephyrian rule permanently. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with dozens of worlds agreeing to coordinate their resistance efforts under human leadership. The Empire that had seemed invincible was suddenly facing coordinated opposition on hundreds of fronts. Amy established secure communication channels between rebel forces, using captured Zephyrian technology to create a network that the Empire could not easily monitor or disrupt. Her technical expertise became the backbone of alliance coordination, allowing species separated by thousands of light years to work together as effectively as if they were in the same star system. The alliance brought together the unique strengths of different species in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. Humans provided tactical expertise and inspirational leadership that helped coordinate complex operations. The Kithani contributed their natural talents for sabotage and technical warfare. The Morvani could survive in environments that would kill other life forms, making them perfect for special operations in hostile conditions. Helen served as the Alliance's primary xenobiologist and cultural advisor, helping different species understand each other well enough to work together effectively. Her years of studying alien cultures proved invaluable as she mediated disputes and found common ground between beings who had never imagined they could be allies. The diversity that the Empire had used to keep subject species divided became a source of strength for the rebellion. The Sorok contributed powerful warships that they had kept hidden for decades, vessels that rivaled Zephyrian technology, and gave the Alliance the heavy firepower needed for direct confrontations. The reptilian warriors had been planning their own rebellion for years, gathering resources and waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake's defiance provided the spark they needed to finally reveal their preparations. Jake coordinated the alliance. From the bridge of the renamed Freedom's Dawn, the former Zephyrian command ship that had become the symbol of successful resistance against Imperial rule. The vessel had been modified with technology from dozens of species, creating a unique hybrid that represented everything the Alliance stood for. Its weapons could match anything in the Imperial fleet, while its communication systems linked rebel forces across the galaxy. The strategic situation transformed as more species joined the Alliance and committed their resources to the common cause. What had begun as desperate uprisings on individual worlds evolved into a coordinated campaign that threatened the very foundations of Imperial power. The Zephyrians found themselves fighting on hundreds of fronts simultaneously. Their forces stretched beyond the breaking point. The Alliance fleet began forming in the outer regions of the galaxy, with ships from dozens of species converging on rally points that Jake and his staff had carefully selected. The sight of vessels from so many different worlds flying in formation was inspiring to all who saw it, proof that the dream of galactic freedom was becoming reality. Jake stood on the Bridge of Freedom's dawn and watched the growing fleet through the main view screen. Ships that had been built by different species using completely different technologies somehow worked together as a unified force. The Alliance represented something new in galactic history, a voluntary cooperation between equals, rather than domination by a single empire. The final phase of the Liberation campaign was about to begin as the Alliance fleet prepared to jump toward Zephyr Prime, the heavily fortified capital world of the Empire. The battle for the Imperial homeworld would determine whether freedom or tyranny would rule the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. The Liberation Alliance fleet emerged from hyperspace at Zephyr Prime like an avenging storm, their ships appearing in perfect formation around the heavily fortified capital world of the Empire. Jake watched from the Bridge of Freedom's dawn as hundreds of vessels from dozens of species took their positions for the largest space battle in galactic history. The planet ahead of them was surrounded by massive orbital defense platforms and protected by the Imperial Guard fleet, elite units that had never known defeat. The sight of the enemy defenses was overwhelming, with energy barriers that could stop planet-killing weapons and gun platforms the size of small moons. The Imperial Guard ships were works of art as much as instruments of war, their hulls decorated with precious metals and crystalline structures that had been crafted over centuries. These were the vessels that had conquered the galaxy, commanded by admirals who had never lost a single engagement. Amy coordinated the Alliance attack from her position at the tactical station, her skills now enhanced by technology from multiple species that allowed her to process information faster than any single mind could manage. The combined databases of the Alliance had revealed weaknesses in Imperial defenses that no individual species could have discovered alone. Her targeting solutions guided Alliance weapons with precision that surprised even veteran Zephyrian commanders. The battle began with a coordinated assault on the orbital defense platforms, using tactics that combined human unpredictability with alien technological advantages. Kithani saboteurs had infiltrated several platforms weeks earlier, waiting for this moment to disable critical systems from within. Sorok heavy cruisers provided covering fire while Morvani crystal ships slipped through energy barriers that could not affect their unique molecular structure. Chris led the ground assault teams that would attempt to reach the planet's surface and capture the central command facilities buried beneath the capital city. The Big Sergeant had been promoted to general during the Liberation campaign, his tactical skills proving invaluable in coordinating operations between species with completely different combat doctrines. His forces included the best warriors from every Alliance world, united by their shared commitment to freedom. The space battle raged for hours as Alliance forces fought their way through the Imperial Guard fleet, using every advantage their diversity could provide. Human pilots flew evasive patterns that confused enemy targeting systems, while Kithani engineers conducted real-time sabotage of captured enemy vessels. The Morvani proved nearly invulnerable to energy weapons, allowing them to serve as living shields for more fragile Alliance ships. Helen made her crucial discovery during the height of the battle, analyzing data from captured Imperial computers while explosions lit up the space around them. The Zephyrian Empire's control systems were centralized in massive quantum computers buried deep beneath their capital city. If the Alliance could reach these facilities, they could free every enslaved world simultaneously by broadcasting liberation codes throughout the Empire's communication network. The revelation changed everything about the ground assault mission. Instead of simply capturing the Imperial leadership, the Alliance forces would need to fight their way to the most heavily defended location on the planet and hold it long enough for Helen to reprogram systems that control billions of lives. The mission became a race against time as Imperial reinforcements converged on Zephyr Prime from across the galaxy. Jake led a small strike team toward the planet's surface while the space battle continued overhead, using a captured Imperial shuttle to penetrate the defensive perimeter around the capital city. The team included the best soldiers from each alliance species, warriors who had proven themselves in dozens of previous battles. Their diversity was their strength, allowing them to adapt to any situation they might encounter the assault on. The Imperial capital was unlike anything in military history, with Alliance forces using tactics that the defenders had never imagined possible. Human creativity combined with alien technology created weapons and strategies that broke through defenses that had protected the Empire for centuries. The fighting was brutal and desperate, with both sides knowing that the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. The quantum computer facility lay deep beneath the city, protected by layers of security that represented the accumulated paranoia of centuries of Imperial rule. Jake's team fought through corridors filled with automated defenses and elite guards, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the system that enslaved half the galaxy. The casualties were terrible, but the survivors pressed forward with determination that amazed even their enemies. The final confrontation took place in the chamber that housed the Empire's central control systems, where Jake faced the Zephyrian Emperor himself. The ancient ruler was older than entire civilizations. His life extended by technology that allowed him to rule for over 3 centuries. He represented everything Jake despised about tyranny, the belief that some beings had the right to control others through fear and violence. The battle between Jake and the Emperor was as much philosophical as physical, with each warrior representing a completely different vision of how the galaxy should be organized. The Emperor argued that order required hierarchy and control, that freedom led only to chaos and destruction. Jake fought for the principle that all sentient beings deserved the right to determine their own destiny. Regardless of their species or origin, Jake's victory over the Emperor came through the same qualities that had made humans dangerous too. The Empire from the beginning: adaptability, creativity, and absolute refusal to accept defeat. The ancient ruler had relied on proven strategies that had worked for centuries, but humans constantly found new solutions to old problems. When the Emperor fell, his death marked the end of an age of tyranny that had lasted for 1,000 years. Helen's reprogramming of the quantum computers sent liberation codes to every Zephyrian installation in the galaxy, a signal that traveled faster than light through the Empire's own communication network. Across hundreds of worlds, slave collars deactivated, prison doors opened, and suppression fields shut down. The technology that had maintained Imperial control for centuries became the instrument of its destruction. The aftermath of the liberation was almost as challenging as the war itself, with newly freed species struggling to rebuild societies that had been broken by generations of oppression. The Alliance evolved into the Galactic Federation of Free Worlds, with Earth serving as one of the founding members alongside dozens of other liberated civilizations. The principles that Jake had fought for became the foundation of a new galactic order. 6 months after the fall of the Empire, Jake stood before a gathering of representatives from across the galaxy, receiving honors that he had never sought but somehow deserved. The scars he bore from 100 battles served as reminders of the price that freedom required. But the sight of children from dozens of species playing together in rebuilt cities made every sacrifice worthwhile. The final scene took place on Earth's restored surface, where parks that had once lay in ruins now bloomed with life from across the galaxy. Jake watched alien and human children play together under a blue sky that had almost been lost forever, and reflected that sometimes the greatest victories began with a single individual who refused to accept that defeat was inevitable. The lone human who had defied an empire had become the catalyst for a new age of freedom that would echo through the stars for generations to come.